Reira, ina nei ka huri te titiro ki a koe, Dr. Brad Case from AUT. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora. Our project has been going for about 2 years now, and we've been working on understanding how to enhance biodiversity in agroecosystems. If we want to stop the decline or even increase biodiversity in New Zealand, where do we do this and how do we do it? We're showing how agroecosystems can be one of the solutions to this. A key result from our project is that 40% of New Zealand is currently managed under sheep and beef farming, and that these farm ecosystems contain about 17% of New Zealand's remaining native woody vegetation, and that much of this vegetation is in lowland areas that are not well represented in our conservation estate. So we have an opportunity here to enhance biodiversity and to increase ecosystem function across a large area of New Zealand by connecting existing vegetation components and restoring new vegetation in less productive areas of these farms. So there are about over 12,000 sheep and beef farmers in New Zealand, and we've been talking to them recently about what biodiversity is and what it means to them, and it's clear that biodiversity is actually really important to farmers, and we've heard a little bit about that over the past day or so. And the majority have already considered how to incorporate biodiversity in their farm planning, and they're actively doing things like managing for pest animals and weeds. About 50% of the farmers we talked to indicated that they had more than 10% of their land already set aside for things like biodiversity protection. And so these sheep and beef farmers are largely already on board in a lot of ways with the idea of enhancing biodiversity, and so this is an obvious place for us to focus our efforts. But we also know there's some really significant barriers to improving biodiversity in farm ecosystems, and 40% of the farmers that we talked to said they don't either have the time or the money or even the skills or knowledge to protect biodiversity adequately. And however, some of our ag research collaborators on this project have shown that farmers don't necessarily have to forfeit their profit at the expense of biodiversity management. And by optimizing farm systems, farmers can retire parts of their farm for conservation and still maintain profitability. So we know that there are things we can do on farm to restore biodiversity, such as restoration activities, fencing activities, and these improve habitat quality. They increase habitat and they increase the connectivity of the habitat across landscapes, and this is ultimately good for biodiversity. But what we don't fully really understand yet is the effects of these activities at the farm scale on our native species and processes specifically across multiple spatial scales. And for instance, some of our lit review work showed that we know more about ecology of our pest mammals in agricultural ecosystems than we do about our native birds. And for 10 of the 18 native species that we looked at in New Zealand, there was actually no information about their movement in agroecosystems and the home range sizes. And so we need a lot more research on natural history and basic ecology for how our species are functioning in this 40% of New Zealand. And current government schemes such as the 1 Billion Trees scheme are providing a way to roll out restoration activities across the country at a large scale, but how do we get the most out of this type of funding program for biodiversity gain? We've now just got some co-funding to set up long-term experimental trials to demonstrate the science required to achieve old-growth forest restoration as fast as possible and investigate the social drivers of why people would engage in native forest restoration, including using carbon as an incentive. So there's also a gap in biodiversity knowledge amongst landowners, farmers, consultants, and the public in general, and we need to develop innovative ways to deliver knowledge about biodiversity and the skills to manage for it to the landowners and to the people who influence the agricultural sectors. And our project is creating resources aimed at stakeholders, students, and the public in order to address this gap. And our project is also working towards developing analysis methods and decision support tools to predict what the consequences of our on-farm biodiversity management activities might be at the landscape scale in terms of ecological processes. And so filling the science knowledge gaps about how our flora and our fauna and our ecological processes operate within farm ecosystems is urgently needed. There's no doubt about that. But the key to restoring biodiversity and resilience on farmlands in New Zealand is mostly about reaching people, as we've talked about, to create the right relationships and the right action. And so now much of our effort is directed at multiple ways to achieve this, like the creation of decision support tools based on remote sensing, and our extension activities, including trialing restoration ambassadors across New Zealand, and putting out online extension resources to reach large groups of people. And ultimately, we hope that through harnessing these opportunities within agroecosystems, we can start to reverse the decline of New Zealand's native biodiversity. Thank you.